The year was 1871, and the small Irish village of Kilkenny was much like any other rural settlement of the time. Narrow cobblestone streets wound between humble cottages, smoke rose from peat fires, and the sound of horse-drawn carts filled the morning air. Life was simple, yet often harsh. Families worked long hours tending the land. Children grew up quickly, and secrets, like coins in a pocket, were often kept hidden beneath the surface of daily routines. In one such cottage lived the Doyle family. Patrick Doyle, a hard-working farmer, and his wife Margaret raised their 3 children with quiet discipline. Their youngest, Catherine, was a bright-eyed girl with an unassuming gentleness about her. She did not stand out for beauty or boldness. Rather, she was known for her quiet watchfulness, as though she noticed things most children overlooked. It was during the spring of that year, when Catherine was only 6 years old, that something remarkable began to unfold. Her family first noticed it at the dinner table. Catherine, without hesitation, remarked that her older brother had been scolded at school earlier in the day for carving his name into the wooden desk. Patrick and Margaret froze. No one had told Catherine. The boy himself had confessed to no one, fearing punishment at home. At first, the family dismissed it as coincidence. Perhaps she had guessed, perhaps she had overheard. But soon, the incidents grew too frequent and too exact to be ignored. Catherine began speaking of things she had no earthly way of knowing. One morning, their neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, visited the Doyle cottage, frantic over her missing wedding ring. She had searched every corner of her home to no avail. Catherine, who was playing by the fire, looked up and said softly, "It's under the loose stone near your hen house." The room fell silent. Margaret shushed her daughter, embarrassed by what seemed like nonsense. But later that afternoon, Mrs. Callahan returned, her face pale and her hands trembling. She had indeed found the ring beneath the very stone Catherine had described. Word of this strange event spread quickly through the village. Some were curious, some uneasy, and others skeptical. For Catherine, the gift did not feel like a gift at all. She was far too young to understand why she knew what she knew. The knowledge came to her without warning, uninvited, like whispers of truth carried on the wind. When she tried to explain it, her words were simple. "It's just there in my head, as if someone told me without speaking." This mysterious ability soon revealed itself in other ways. She once told her father to take a different road into town because the bridge won't hold you today. Skeptical but cautious, Patrick chose another route. That evening, news arrived that the old wooden bridge had collapsed under a heavy wagon. Another time, Catherine tugged on her mother's apron strings and urged her not to send her brother into the fields because of the storm that's coming. The skies were clear, the air calm, yet Margaret listened to her daughter's plea. By nightfall, a sudden violent wind had swept through the area, toppling branches and flooding low ground. The boy, safe at home, would have been caught in the storm had he gone. At first, the Doyles were quietly grateful for their daughter's unusual knowledge. They took it as a sign of God's hand upon her, though not without some unease. But the village itself reacted differently. The people of Kilkenny were superstitious, shaped by centuries of folklore and tales of omens. To some, Catherine's gift was a blessing. To others, it was a danger, something to be feared. What made Catherine's case more unsettling was not just that she knew things about objects or events. She also seemed to know secrets of the heart. She once told a weary farmer, "You never forgave your brother for leaving you." The man's face turned pale. No one had ever spoken of the bitterness he carried. Another time, she quietly said to a young woman, "You're afraid the child you lost was your fault." But it wasn't. The woman wept, astonished that her private grief had been spoken aloud. These revelations brought comfort to some, but also discomfort to others. People began whispering in church pews, questioning whether Catherine's knowledge came from God or from something less holy. Some avoided her family altogether, while others sought them out in desperation, eager to have their own hidden truths uncovered. For Catherine herself, the burden of this mysterious gift grew heavy. She was just a child who longed for play, laughter, and acceptance, but she could not escape the knowledge that pressed itself upon her mind. She began to realize that truth, though powerful, was not always welcome. Some people were relieved to hear it, others were angered, frightened, or ashamed. Yet even at her young age, Catherine showed a rare wisdom. She did not flaunt her ability or use it to harm. Instead, she spoke softly, carefully, choosing her words not to wound but to help. She once told her mother, "I don't want to scare people. I only want them to feel lighter, not heavier." That simple intention, choosing compassion over fear, would become the defining mark of Catherine Doyle's life. What others saw as a strange and frightening power, she carried as a responsibility. She did not think of it as magic, nor as a curse, but simply as a light that had been placed in her hands. And even though it sometimes burned too brightly for those around her, she tried, with all the innocence of a child, to use it for kindness. As Catherine Doyle's reputation grew within the small village of Kilkenny, so too did the weight she carried. What had once seemed like innocent words spoken by a child now began to feel more like a force that separated her from the ordinary world. With every passing day, Catherine realized that her gift was not one she could set aside when she wished. Truth arrived unbidden, and truth, she discovered, did not always bring comfort. At only 6 years old, she had no choice but to confront a reality that many adults avoided. The truth often unsettles more than it soothes. One of the earliest moments that marked this change happened at the village market. Catherine had accompanied her mother, Margaret, who was buying flour and cloth. The marketplace was alive with chatter, the smell of peat smoke, and the laughter of children running between stalls. Catherine, holding tightly to her mother's hand, suddenly looked at a well-dressed man speaking with the butcher. Without hesitation, she said aloud, "You should return the money you took. It wasn't yours." The man froze. The butcher, confused, glanced from Catherine to his customer. Margaret quickly hushed her daughter, tugging her away in embarrassment. But the damage was done. The man's face drained of color, and whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Later that week, it quietly emerged that the man had indeed taken money that was not his, cheating a neighbor in a deal. For Catherine, the incident was bewildering. She had not meant to shame him. The words had pressed themselves against her tongue until she could not hold them back. But she also began to understand a frightening truth. People did not always want honesty. For many, it was easier to live with secrets than to face them exposed in the daylight. The Doyle cottage grew quieter in the evenings. Patrick and Margaret loved their daughter, but could not deny their unease. Margaret, in particular, worried about Catherine's future. "A child who knows too much," she whispered to her husband, "will never be left in peace." Catherine herself felt the sting of isolation. Other children avoided her, whispering that she could see inside their thoughts. She longed to join their games in the meadow, but when she approached, laughter often fell into silence. The same gift that had once amazed her family now marked her as different. For a 6-year-old, this was not just strange, it was heartbreaking. She began to retreat into quietness, spending hours by the fire, staring at the dancing flames. When her mother asked what troubled her, Catherine simply said, "I wish I didn't always know. It makes me feel heavy inside." The adults of Kilkenny were divided in their view of Catherine. Some sought her out secretly, desperate for her words. A grieving widow asked Catherine if her late husband had left her anything hidden. Catherine, after a long silence, told her to check the rafters of the barn. There, wrapped in cloth, the widow found a small box of coins. Overcome with gratitude, she declared Catherine an angel. But for every person who praised her, there were others who muttered of curses and unnatural forces. In an age when superstition walked hand in hand with faith, Catherine's gift was as likely to spark fear as wonder. People avoided crossing her path, worried that she might expose their private failings. Her very presence became unsettling, for who among them lived without secrets? Thus Catherine learned another heavy lesson: truth is rarely welcomed in equal measure. For every person healed by it, another would turn away, resentful or ashamed. What made her burden heavier still was the fact that Catherine could not ignore what she knew. Unlike adults who might choose silence, her childlike honesty compelled her to speak. At night, she sometimes cried quietly, telling her mother, "It feels like I'm carrying things that aren't mine." Margaret, heartbroken, tried to comfort her. She urged Catherine to pray, to give her worries to God, but even prayer did not erase the constant stream of unspoken truths that filled the little girl's mind. Catherine was learning that knowledge, while powerful, could be exhausting, especially when it carried the weight of other people's pain. Despite the fear and misunderstanding she faced, Catherine began to develop a sense of restraint. She realized that not every truth needed to be spoken aloud. Watching her parents struggle with their worries taught her something profound. Sometimes truth must be shared gently, with compassion, or else it can cut deeper than any knife. One afternoon, she encountered a farmer known for his bitterness. She sensed his anger toward his own brother, who had abandoned the family farm. Instead of blurting it out, she sat beside him and quietly said, "Holding anger is like carrying stones in your pocket. It makes the journey heavier. Maybe you could put one down." The man did not reply, but days later, word spread that he had reconciled with his estranged brother. Catherine had learned that the truth, when clothed in kindness, could heal instead of wound. The older Catherine grew, the more aware she became of this delicate balance. Her gift was not a simple blessing, nor was it a curse. It was a responsibility, one that required wisdom far beyond her years. She began to carry her words like a lantern in the dark, to be used only when necessary, and always with care. But the burden remained. Few understood what it cost her to know what she knew, to carry secrets that were not hers, to bear truths that others would rather bury. She bore it in silence, her small shoulders carrying a weight that most adults could not endure. The story of Catherine's burden reminds us that truth is powerful, but it is not always easy to bear. In our own lives, we sometimes face the heavy responsibility of honesty, whether it is telling the truth to a loved one, admitting our mistakes, or confronting something within ourselves. Like Catherine, we may discover that truth isolates us at times, but it also frees us and those around us. Her story teaches us that truth, when handled with compassion, becomes not a weapon but a medicine. Though it may be painful, it is ultimately the path to healing. By the time Catherine Doyle turned 7, the village of Kilkenny no longer saw her simply as Patrick and Margaret Doyle's youngest child. She had become the girl who knows. Some whispered her name with awe, others with suspicion. But to Catherine herself, being known for such a strange gift was not a blessing. It was a burden that made her feel more apart from the world with every passing day. Children are often the first to sense when someone is different. At first, Catherine longed to join the games of chase and skipping rope in the meadows beyond the cottages. But whenever she approached, voices dropped to whispers. Some children stared as if she carried an invisible mark. Others backed away as though her presence alone could reveal their secrets. One afternoon, she ran to join a group of girls playing with dolls by the stream. A girl shouted, "Don't let her touch them! She'll tell the dolls what we're thinking." The laughter that followed pierced Catherine's small heart more deeply than the words. She turned away, her face flushed, pretending she had no interest in their games. But in truth, she walked home slowly, her head bowed, wondering why her difference made her unworthy of friendship. Isolation became her constant companion. At an age when children crave acceptance, Catherine found herself an outsider, watching joy from the edges rather than being part of it. Adults, too, carried their unease into daily interactions. When Margaret sent Catherine to fetch bread from the baker, the man would often hand over the loaf without meeting her eyes. Others crossed themselves when she passed, muttering about omens and signs. Though some came secretly to her family's door, seeking her knowledge in desperate moments, few dared to treat her like an ordinary child in public. It created a confusing contradiction for Catherine. Behind closed doors, she was begged to reveal what she knew: lost objects, hidden truths, warnings of storms. Yet out in the sunlight of daily life, those same people avoided her as if she were marked with something unclean. The message was clear to Catherine: she was useful, but she was not welcome. Her parents, Patrick and Margaret, wrestled with their own fears. They loved their daughter deeply, but they could not shield her from the whispers. Patrick tried to encourage her, saying, "You're special, Catherine. Don't let their words break you." But his eyes betrayed his worry, for he knew the world was rarely kind to those who stood apart. Margaret often wept in secret, fearful that her daughter would grow up shunned and lonely. She urged Catherine to keep quiet when her knowledge pressed against her tongue. People don't always want the truth, child. Sometimes silence keeps you safe. But Catherine struggled with that advice. Her heart was too innocent, too honest. She found it difficult to remain silent when truth swirled inside her, demanding release. And so, despite her best efforts, she continued to be both sought after and avoided. The most painful moments came not from strangers, but from those Catherine longed to call friends. Once, when she overheard two girls quarreling, Catherine quietly said, "You don't hate each other. You're just afraid of losing her." The quarrel ended instantly, the truth in her words undeniable. But instead of gratitude, the girls grew frightened.
"She's spying inside us,"
one cried, and from then on, they refused to speak to her. Catherine learned the bitter lesson that even kindness, when born of difference, could turn people away. Loneliness pressed down on her small shoulders like a heavy cloak. She began to spend more time wandering alone through the fields, finding solace in nature. Birds, flowers, and streams did not whisper about her. The wind did not fear her. In their presence she felt a kind of acceptance she could not find among people. Yet within this struggle grew a quiet resilience. Catherine, though young, began to realize that difference is rarely easy to bear. Those who walk a path apart from others often face misunderstanding, fear, even rejection. But she also began to see that difference, though painful, was not weakness. It was strength, though a strength that demanded patience and courage. She once told her mother, "If I cannot play their games, I will make my own." And so she began to tell herself stories, weaving tales out of the sky and fields, imagining companions in the shapes of clouds or the patterns of stars. In solitude she discovered creativity, and in creativity, a kind of healing. What set Catherine apart was not just her mysterious gift, but her ability to find meaning in her struggles. Though she often cried quietly at night, she never allowed bitterness to take root. Instead, she reflected with a wisdom far beyond her years. "They don't hate me. They're just afraid of what they don't understand." This simple truth planted a seed in her young heart, the recognition that fear, not cruelty, was often the source of rejection. That seed would grow into empathy, shaping the way she used her gift in the years to come. By the time Catherine Doyle reached her 8th year, she had already learned lessons that most adults took a lifetime to grasp. She had felt the sting of isolation, the heaviness of truth, and the loneliness of being set apart. Yet from within that loneliness grew something unexpected, a resolve. She realized that if her gift was to remain with her, whether she welcomed it or not, she had a choice in how to use it. She could allow it to crush her under its weight, or she could turn it outward, using it not for herself but for the good of others. This quiet decision marked a turning point in her young life. Catherine chose to help. The first clear moment of this choice came when a widow named Mrs. O'Leary came to the Doyle home, weeping. Her husband had died suddenly, leaving her with debts and 3 small children. She whispered through tears that she could not find the little savings he had hidden. Margaret, uncomfortable, tried to send her away gently, but Catherine stepped forward. She looked at the widow and said softly, "There's a tin box under the floorboard in the corner of your room, near the bed." The widow's eyes widened. She left at once, and by evening she returned, clutching the box. Inside were coins enough to keep her children fed for several months. She fell to her knees, blessing Catherine through sobs of gratitude. For the first time, Catherine saw her gift not as a curse that brought fear, but as a blessing that brought hope. That night she told her mother, "If what I know can help someone, then I must speak." Word spread quietly of the child who could guide and protect. Farmers began to listen when Catherine offered small warnings. "Don't take your cattle down that hill today," she once told a neighbor. Hours later, the hill flooded after a sudden rain. "Mend that fence before tomorrow," she told another, and the very next day a wild boar was seen nearby. At first, these warnings seemed like luck, but when they came true again and again, Villagers who had once whispered in fear began to whisper in cautious respect. Some still avoided her in daylight, but more and more came to her family in private, seeking her counsel. Catherine's choice to help was not born out of pride. It was born out of compassion. She could not bear to see others suffer when she held even a fragment of knowledge that might spare them. Yet helping others was not without its cost. Each truth Catherine spoke carried weight, and some truths could not be softened. Once, she told a mother searching for her lost son, "He is by the river, but he will not come home alive." The woman wailed in anguish, and when the boy's drowned body was found, grief consumed the family. Though Catherine's words had prepared them, they also marked her as the bearer of unbearable truths. The burden of such moments pressed heavily upon her. She confessed to her father one evening, "I don't want to hurt people, but I can't lie. If I stay silent, I feel I've failed them. If I speak, I feel I've broken them." Patrick, holding her small hand, whispered, "The truth hurts, but it also heals. You are not the cause of their pain, Catherine. You are the light that helps them face it." Over time, Catherine learned to use her gift not only for warnings or revelations, but also for small, gentle acts of kindness. She would tell a wary man, "Your father was proud of you, though he never said it." Or whisper to a grieving woman, "The child you lost knows you loved him." These words, unseen and intangible, often carried more power than gold or food. They offered peace to hearts burdened by guilt, regret, or silence. Catherine discovered that sometimes the greatest help she could give was not in predicting storms or finding lost objects, but in speaking the truths people most needed to hear but could never say aloud. Though many villagers still struggled to understand her, respect began to replace suspicion. People began to say, "The child is touched by God," while others, less certain, admitted, "At least she means no harm." Catherine did not seek their approval. What mattered to her was the small light she could kindle in lives shadowed by fear, grief, or need. She no longer asked, "Why me?" Instead, she began to say, "If I can, I will." That simple shift, accepting her gift as a tool for service, transformed her isolation into purpose. Catherine's choice to help was not an easy one. It meant carrying burdens that were not hers, enduring suspicion, and sometimes delivering truths that others did not want to hear. But it also meant creating ripples of change in her community. Families found relief, lives were spared, and hearts were comforted. Her story reminds us of a timeless truth. We cannot always choose the gifts or burdens life gives us, but we can always choose how to use them. Catherine's gift set her apart, but her choice to help gave her life meaning. Catherine Doyle's choice teaches us that difference becomes powerful only when directed toward service. Many of us carry burdens, unusual talents, painful experiences, or knowledge that weighs heavy. But when we choose to use what we have, however strange or heavy it feels, to lighten the load of others, our difference becomes a blessing. Catherine reminds us that help does not always mean grand gestures. Sometimes it is a warning spoken at the right moment. Sometimes it is the comfort of words that ease a hidden wound. Sometimes it is simply the courage to share what we know, even when others may not understand. By the time Catherine Doyle was 9 years old, people no longer saw her merely as a child. Though her body was small and her face still held the softness of youth, her eyes carried something far older, an understanding that seemed beyond her years. Her gift had forced her to grow in ways that other children never needed to. While her peers laughed freely in the fields or dreamed of simple futures, Catherine wrestled with truth's burdens and questions about human nature itself. She became in many ways a child in years but a sage in spirit. One autumn afternoon, two farmers in Kilkenny erupted into a heated argument over land boundaries. Their voices rose, fists clenched, tempers ready to boil over. A small crowd gathered, waiting for the fight to turn violent. Catherine, who had been standing nearby with her mother, stepped forward. In her soft but steady voice, she said, "You both love the same land. You're fighting not because it isn't yours, but because it means too much to both of you. If you shared the work, you'd both have more harvest than anger." The men froze, silenced not by authority, but by the innocence of the speaker. One lowered his eyes. The other muttered, The child speak sense. The crowd dispersed, and the quarrel dissolved. What amazed people most was not that Catherine spoke truth, but that she spoke it with such clarity and gentleness. Her words cut through pride without leaving wounds. She possessed the rare ability to deliver hard truths in ways that invited reflection instead of resistance. Her wisdom also revealed itself in how she comforted the grieving. A young woman who had lost her infant son came to Catherine, her face hollow with sorrow. She expected pity or empty reassurances. Instead, Catherine quietly said, "Your child was never unloved. You gave him more love in his short days than some feel in a lifetime. That love is his forever, and it will always be yours." The woman wept, not from pain but from the release of guilt she had carried. Catherine's words did not erase the loss, but they transformed it into something bearable. For a 9-year-old to speak with such understanding astonished even the village priest, who remarked, "This child carries wisdom that is not her own." Perhaps the greatest mark of Catherine's wisdom was not only what she said, but what she chose not to say. She began to recognize that silence could be as powerful as speech. When people asked her questions she knew would wound them, she sometimes lowered her gaze and simply offered a smile. "Not all truths are meant to be spoken," she once explained to her father. "Some are meant only to be carried." This restraint was not born of fear but of compassion. Catherine understood that timing mattered, that truth given too soon could harm, but truth given in its season could heal. Such discernment was far beyond her tender years. It was not uncommon for grown men and women to leave her presence humbled, even changed. Catherine's words carried weight not because of authority, but because they revealed truths people had long buried. Her youth stripped away pretense. She spoke plainly, without agenda, and that simplicity was often more powerful than sermons. An old farmer once scoffed, "What can a child know of life?" To which Catherine replied, "Sometimes children see clearly because they have not yet learned to close their eyes." That remark traveled through the village, repeated with both admiration and unease. It was a reminder that wisdom is not always tied to age, but to clarity of heart. But such wisdom came at a cost. Catherine's childhood was shortened, her innocence thinned by the weight of what she carried. She often longed to laugh freely like the other children, to run without care, to be seen not as a seer, but simply as Catherine. At night she sometimes asked her mother, "Why do I have to know so much? Why can't I just be like the others?" Margaret, holding her close, could only whisper, "Perhaps God chose you because you could carry it." Even in her longing for simplicity, Catherine accepted her role. She did not rebel against her difference, but she did mourn the childhood it had taken from her. That mourning, too, became part of her wisdom, the understanding that life's gifts often come wrapped with sacrifice. Through Catherine, the people of Kilkenny slowly began to learn lessons they had long resisted. They learned that pride destroyed more than it preserved, that forgiveness lightened the heart, and that truth, when spoken with love, was a balm instead of a blade. Even those who feared her could not deny the impact she had. Neighbors reconciled, families found hidden means of survival, and grief was soothed in quiet ways. The child who should have been dismissed as too young to understand, instead became a teacher to those twice and thrice her age. Catherine's story reminds us that wisdom is not bound by years. True wisdom is born from compassion, honesty, and the courage to see what others refuse to see. While experience deepens wisdom, sometimes innocence sharpens it. Her life teaches us that each of us, no matter how young or how overlooked, carries the ability to offer light to others. We do not need long years to see clearly, we need only open hearts. Catherine also teaches that wisdom is not merely knowledge. It is the grace of knowing when to speak, when to stay silent, and always choosing love as the guide. Catherine Doyle's life was not long, but it was profound. By the time she reached her early teens, the village of Kilkenny had quietly accepted her as a permanent part of its story, a strange child marked by mystery, but also by undeniable goodness. She had helped the grieving, warned the careless, and soothed the bitter. And though she bore loneliness and whispers, she carried herself with quiet grace. Her legacy was not written in books or carved into stone. It was carried in the lives of the people she touched, in the softened hearts and reconciled families, in the wisdom that lingered long after she had spoken. Catherine's life was proof that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it consoles, and sometimes it simply endures. What made Catherine remarkable was not just her mysterious gift, but her courage to live with it openly. She never pretended to be ordinary, never denied what she knew, even when it brought her fear or rejection. She understood something that most adults struggled with. To live honestly with who you are is braver than to hide. Catherine could have silenced herself to win acceptance, but she chose truth instead. In doing so, she became a living reminder that courage is not about fighting battles. It is about standing firmly in one's own truth, no matter how misunderstood. This courage inspired others in quiet ways. A farmer who had hidden his shame for years found the strength to confess and make amends. A widow, comforted by Catherine's words, dared to face life again instead of sinking into despair. Each act of courage Catherine displayed lit a small spark in others, reminding them that honesty, though hard, was freeing. Though she was only a child, Catherine's choices created ripples far beyond what she could see. The men who ended their quarrel because of her words began to farm side by side, teaching their children the value of peace over pride. The woman comforted in grief later became known for comforting others in their losses, passing forward the compassion she herself had received. In this way, Catherine's influence spread through the village like a quiet current, unseen but felt. People began to measure their actions differently, asking themselves, what would the Doyle girl say if she knew? The very thought of her presence inspired honesty and reflection. This was her true legacy, not just the secrets she revealed, but the courage she instilled in others to face their own truths. Catherine's life was not without sadness. She never fully knew the carefree laughter of childhood. She bore isolation, heavy knowledge, and responsibilities that no child should carry. Yet she never let bitterness consume her. Her sacrifice became her strength. By giving up what was light and easy, she embraced what was weighty and meaningful. This, too, was part of her courage. The ability to accept life not as she wished it to be, but as it was given to her. Her story teaches us that even when our path is not what we hoped for, we can walk it with dignity and purpose. Catherine did not choose her gift, but she chose how to live with it. And in that choice lay the essence of her courage. When Catherine passed away at a young age, some say from illness, others from frailty, the village mourned her deeply. For all the whispers that had once surrounded her, there was no denying the light she had brought into dark corners of many lives. Her funeral was small but heartfelt. Neighbors who had once feared her now wept openly. The priest, in his homily, said, "She was a child who carried the weight of a grown soul." She taught us that truth, though heavy, is the road to freedom. In the years that followed, her name became a story told to children, not a tale of superstition or fear, but of courage. Parents would remind their little ones, "Remember Catherine Doyle, the child who spoke truth. Be brave like her." What, then, was Catherine's true legacy? It was not her mysterious knowledge, nor the secrets she revealed. Those were passing wonders, soon blurred by time. Her real legacy was the example she set, the courage to be herself, even when others doubted or feared her. The courage to speak truth, even when it hurt or risked rejection. The courage to use her difference for good, turning her burden into a blessing. But the courage to carry loneliness with grace, rather than letting it harden her heart. These lessons outlived her, shaping not only the people of Kilkenny, but also those who would later hear her story. Catherine Doyle's life, though brief, shines as a reminder for us all. Each of us carries something that makes us different, whether it is a gift, a wound, or a story. Often those differences feel like burdens, isolating us from others. But Catherine teaches us that difference can become courage, and courage can become legacy. Her story calls us to ask, what will we do with the truths we carry? Will we hide them out of fear, or will we use them to help others? Will we let our differences isolate us, or will we let them light the way? Catherine chose the harder path, the path of honesty, service, and compassion. And though her time was short, her impact was lasting.